The massive alien warship called Death's Edge floated in space like a dark metal mountain. Inside its steel halls walked creatures that would give children nightmares for years. The ship belonged to the Crimson Syndicate, and they ruled 17 star systems with fear and violence. Every alien species in the galaxy knew their name and trembled when they heard it. Warlord Kang Ho sat on his black throne in the center of the ship's biggest room. His 4 red arms crossed over his chest as he listened to reports from his commanders. His scaly red skin reflected the harsh lights overhead. Around him stood the most dangerous beings in known space. Each one had conquered worlds and enslaved entire populations. Admiral So Min stepped forward to give her report. Her blue skin was cold as ice and her black eyes showed no mercy. She told Kang Ho about their latest victory over a human colony. The aliens had killed thousands and taken the survivors as slaves. The other commanders nodded and growled their approval. They enjoyed hearing about human suffering. The celebration stopped when a strange sound echoed through the ship. Someone was whistling a tune that none of the aliens recognized. The sound came from the corridors outside the throne room. It was a human song, but no humans were supposed to be free on their ship. All human prisoners were locked in cages deep in the ship's belly. The aliens looked at each other with confusion. Their translation devices could not identify the melody. The whistling grew louder as it came closer to the throne room. Some of the smaller aliens stepped back from the doors. Even these hardened killers felt something wrong in the air. The massive blast doors that protected the throne room began to spark and smoke. The aliens heard the sound of metal being torn apart by bare hands. The doors weighed several tons and were made of the strongest materials in the galaxy. Nothing should have been able to break through them without heavy weapons. With a grinding shriek, the doors burst open. Smoke and sparks filled the doorway as a figure walked through the destruction. The aliens expected to see one of their own warriors or maybe a group of escaped prisoners. Instead, they saw something that made even the bravest among them take a step backward. A single human male walked into the throne room. His military boots made steady clicking sounds on the metal floor. He wore the torn uniform of a United States Marine. His clothes were covered in alien blood and his face was marked with cuts and bruises. But his dark eyes burned with a determination that cut through the alien warriors like a sharp blade. Staff Sergeant Dong-Woo Kim stopped in the center of the room and looked around at the assembled aliens. His rifle hung casually from his shoulder as if he were taking a walk in a park instead of standing in the heart of enemy territory. Behind him lay a trail of destruction that stretched back through the ship's corridors. Security systems had been torn apart. Blast doors had been ripped from their frames. The bodies of elite alien guards were scattered along his path. The throne room fell silent except for the humans' calm breathing and the distant sound of alarms wailing throughout the ship. Kang Ho's 4 eyes widened as he tried to understand what he was seeing. In all his years of conquest, no single being had ever broken through their defenses. No warrior had ever walked alone into the center of their power and lived to tell about it. The human stood quietly and waited. He did not seem afraid or nervous. He looked like he owned the place and was simply deciding what to do next. The aliens had built their empire on fear and intimidation. They were used to enemies who begged for mercy or died screaming. This calm confidence was something none of them had ever encountered before. General Hyunwoo was the first to speak. The massive 6-armed creature stepped forward and pointed one of his clawed hands at the human. He demanded to know how a single human had penetrated their most secure vessel. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder, but the human did not flinch or show any sign of fear. Dong-Woo Kim looked up at the towering alien general and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had found his prey. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady, like a teacher explaining something simple to a child. He told the aliens that they had made a mistake when they attacked human colonies. They thought humans were weak because they had never seen them fight back properly. The Syndicate had only faced human civilians and poorly equipped planetary defense forces. They had never faced a United States Marine. The human reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. It looked like a simple communicator, but when he activated it, the aliens heard something that chilled their blood. It was a recording of their own voices giving orders to kill human prisoners. But more importantly, it was being broadcast to every corner of the galaxy on frequencies that could not be blocked or traced. Admiral So-Min hissed and reached for her plasma weapon. She was one of the fastest draws in the Syndicate fleet. Her weapon could fire faster than most beings could blink. She had never missed a target in 30 years of warfare, and she was not about to start with this human. The plasma bolt screamed across the throne room at incredible speed. The bolt should have turned the human into vapor and ash. Instead, Dongwoo Kim simply stepped to one side. The movement looked almost lazy, but it was timed perfectly. The plasma bolt sizzled past him and melted a hole in the wall where he had been standing. Before So-Min could fire again, the human was moving. He crossed the vast throne room in seconds that seemed to stretch like hours. His speed was impossible for someone wearing heavy combat gear, but Earth's gravity was 3 times stronger than most worlds the aliens knew. What seemed like impossible speed to them was normal movement for a human. The aliens finally understood that they were not dealing with a normal prisoner or escaped slave. This was a trained killer from a world where survival required strength and speed that most species could not imagine. They had awakened something that their empire was not prepared to face. The human stopped in front of Kang Ho's throne and looked up at the alien warlord. When he spoke again, his voice carried the authority of someone who had never learned to accept defeat. He told them that their empire was finished. Earth was coming, and when it arrived, the galaxy would learn what humans could do when they were truly angry. The silence in the throne room stretched like a tight rope ready to snap. Warlord Kang Ho stared down at the human who had dared to threaten his empire. His 4 red eyes burned with fury as he processed the words he had just heard. No being in the galaxy had ever spoken to him with such disrespect and lived to see another day. Kang Ho had conquered entire star systems and turned proud civilizations into ash and memory. His name was whispered in fear across 17 worlds. The idea that a single member of what he considered a weak species could threaten him was beyond his understanding. It was an insult that demanded immediate and brutal punishment. The warlord rose from his obsidian throne like a mountain coming to life. His 4 arms spread wide as he towered over the human below. When he spoke, his voice shook the metal walls of the chamber. He told the human that he would die slowly and painfully. His screams would be broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to anyone who dared to oppose the Syndicate. But Sergeant Dongwoo Kim did not seem impressed by the display. He looked up at the massive alien warlord with the same calm expression he had worn since entering the throne room. His hand moved slowly to the combat knife on his belt. The blade was nothing special by human standards, but it had been forged on Earth where metals were stronger due to the planet's heavy gravity. Admiral So-Min decided that she had waited long enough. Her blue skin flushed darker with anger as she drew her backup weapon. This time she would not miss. Her second plasma pistol was smaller but faster than the first. She raised it toward the human's head and squeezed the trigger without warning. The energy bolt crossed the room faster than most beings could follow. It should have ended the fight before it truly began. Instead, the human moved again with that same impossible speed. He ducked under the bolt and rolled forward in one smooth motion. The plasma energy sizzled over his head and struck one of the other alien commanders. General Tae-hyun screamed as the plasma bolt burned through his armor and into his flesh. The massive creature fell backward into a group of smaller aliens who scattered like frightened children. The smell of burned flesh and melted metal filled the air. So-Min stared in shock at what her own weapon had done to her ally. The human came out of his role directly in front of Commander Jin-ae. The tentacled alien swung her massive club downward with enough force to crush a small vehicle. Kim stepped aside and grabbed one of her thick tentacles with both hands. Using her own momentum against her, he spun around and threw the alien commander across the room. Jinny crashed into the wall with a sound like breaking bones. Her club flew from her grip and shattered against the ceiling. Green blood ran down the wall as she slid to the floor. The other aliens stared in disbelief as one of their strongest warriors was defeated by a being half her size. General Hyun-woo roared with rage and charged forward. His 6 arms moved in a blur as he swung his massive sword toward the human's neck. The blade was 4 feet long and sharp enough to cut through starship armor. It should have taken the human's head clean off his shoulders. Instead, Kim dropped to one knee and stabbed upward with his combat knife. The earth-forged steel punched through Hyunwoo's natural armor and into the soft flesh beneath. The alien general's roar turned into a shriek of pain as green blood poured down his chest. His sword clattered to the floor as he stumbled backward. The throne room erupted into chaos as every alien warrior attacked at once. Claws and tentacles and energy weapons filled the air around the lone human. The aliens were bigger and stronger, and had natural weapons that could tear through most armor. By every law of physics and combat, the human should have been overwhelmed in seconds. But Dongwoo Kim had trained for this his entire adult life. The United States Marine Corps had taught him to fight against superior numbers and overwhelming odds. More importantly, he had grown up on a world where everything was heavier and stronger than most aliens could imagine. What seemed impossible to them was just another day at work for him. Kim moved through the attacking aliens like water flowing around rocks. He used their size against them, making them stumble into each other as they tried to reach him. When Commander Soo-jin swung her energy whip at his legs, he jumped over it and landed on her back. His boot drove her face first into the metal floor. Captain Min-jae tried to grab the human with his mechanical arms, but Kim slipped between them and struck it. The control cables. Sparks flew as the cybernetic limbs went dead and useless. The alien captain fell forward, unable to control his own body as his enhancements failed him. Admiral So-min fired her plasma weapon again and again, but each shot missed its target. The human seemed to know where she would aim before she pulled the trigger. Her energy bolt struck the walls and ceiling and other aliens, but never the one target she desperately wanted to hit. Her weapon began to overheat from repeated firing. Within minutes, the throne room looked like a battlefield. Alien warlords who had never known defeat lay groaning on the floor around pools of their own blood. Some clutched broken limbs, while others tried to crawl away from the human who had shattered their pride and their bodies with equal ease. Warlord Kang Ho watched in growing horror as his most trusted commanders were defeated one by one. These were beings who had conquered worlds and enslaved entire species. They were supposed to be the strongest warriors in the galaxy, yet here they lay broken by a single human who barely seemed to be breathing hard. The human turned toward the warlord's throne and began walking forward. His boots clicked steadily on the blood-slicked floor. In his hand, the combat knife gleamed with alien blood. His dark eyes held a promise that made even the mighty Kang Ho step backward. But Kim stopped at the base of the throne and looked up at the alien leader. When he spoke, his voice was calm and professional, like a soldier giving a report to his commanding officer. He told Kang Ho that this was just the beginning. Earth had received the message about what the Syndicate had done to human colonies. Ships were coming, and when they arrived, the galaxy would see what happened when humans went to war. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire in a dry forest. On every world where the Syndicate ruled with fear and violence, beings gathered around communication screens to watch footage that seemed impossible. The security cameras on the Death's Edge had recorded everything, and somehow the video had leaked onto the galactic networks. Captain Yoon Seo was overseeing human slaves in the crystal mines of Kepler 442b when her communications officer brought her the report. The insectoid alien's compound eyes widened as she read the impossible words. A single human had defeated an entire room full of Syndicate warlords. Her mandibles clicked nervously as she tried to process the information. Yoon Seo had always viewed humans as weak, soft creatures that were only good for manual labor and entertainment. Their pale skin bruised easily and their thin bones broke, under pressure that most aliens could handle without problem. She had seen thousands of them work themselves to death in her mines without ever fighting back in any meaningful way. The security footage arrived while she was still trying to convince herself that the report was some kind of mistake. The images were grainy and dark, but they showed everything in brutal detail. The human moved through the alien defenses like they were made of paper instead of reinforced steel and energy barriers. Yoon Seo's hands shook as she watched Sergeant Kim systematically defeat beings who could have crushed her without effort. Admiral So-min was known throughout the Syndicate as one of their deadliest fighters. General Hyunwoo had single-handedly conquered 3 star systems. Yet here, they lay broken and bleeding, while the human barely seemed winded. The footage spread through the underground networks faster than Syndicate security forces could block it. Pirates and smugglers copied the files and transmitted them to every corner of known space. On worlds where alien masters ruled over enslaved populations, the video was watched in secret by beings who had dreamed of fighting back, but never dared to try. Dr. Sujin Park watched the recording from her prison cell on a syndicate research station orbiting a dead star. The human scientist had been captured 3 years earlier while studying alien plant life on a frontier world. Since then, she had endured experiments and torture as the aliens tried to understand human biology. Her heart pounded as she recognized something the aliens had missed completely: the uniform patches, the tactical movements, and the calm professionalism, even when facing impossible odds. This was not just any human who had somehow gotten lucky. This was a United States Marine trained by Earth's finest military instructors, and hardened by conflicts that had shaped humanity into survivors. The implications hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. If one Marine could cause this much damage to the Syndicate's most elite forces, what would happen when the rest of Earth's military learned what had been done to their people? She had seen the casualty reports from the alien raids on human colonies. Millions of people had been killed or enslaved. The aliens thought they were dealing with helpless prey that could be hunted and captured at will. They had no idea that they had awakened a species that had spent thousands of years learning how to fight wars against enemies who seemed impossible to defeat. Human history was written in blood and fire by people who refused to accept surrender as an option. On distant Earth, military satellites detected the transmission signals carrying Sergeant Kim's image across space. Within hours, every major government and military command center on the planet had copies of the footage. General Robert Martinez of the U.S. Space Command watched the recording 5 times before calling an emergency meeting of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The message was clear and undeniable. One of their own was out there fighting alone against impossible odds in enemy territory. Marine Corps tradition dating back hundreds of years demanded only one response. No matter what the cost, no matter how dangerous the mission, they would bring him home. Preparations began immediately across every military base on Earth and Luna. The fastest ships in the human fleet were loaded with Marines, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Air Force Special Operations personnel. These were not regular soldiers, but the finest warriors humanity had ever produced. Each one had trained for years to fight in conditions that would kill most beings. Admiral Sarah Chen took command of the rescue fleet from her flagship, the UNS Defiance. The vessel was smaller than most alien warships, but it had been designed by humans who understood that survival often depended on speed and maneuverability rather than raw firepower. Her crew had trained specifically for deep space combat against technologically superior enemies. The fleet would take weeks to reach Syndicate territory, even at maximum faster than light speed. The aliens controlled most of the jump routes between Earth and the outer rim systems where Kim was trapped. But every human on those ships carried the same determination that had driven their species to conquer their own world despite being surrounded by creatures bigger and stronger than they were. Meanwhile, the footage of Kim's victory was having effects that no one had anticipated. On the agricultural world of Centauri Prime, human slaves began to whisper among themselves about the Marine who had defied their masters. Some even started small acts of rebellion inspired by what they had seen. Factory supervisor Colonel Yunji found herself facing organized resistance for the first time in her career. Human workers were sabotaging equipment and refusing orders, with a boldness that shocked their alien overseers. The usual beatings and executions only seemed to make the humans more determined to fight back. The Syndicate's carefully constructed empire of fear was beginning to crack. For centuries, they had ruled through intimidation and the promise of horrible death for anyone who opposed them. But fear only worked when the victims believed they had no hope of victory. The video of Sergeant Kim had shown oppressed beings throughout the galaxy that aliens could be defeated. Supreme Commander Minho received reports of unrest from 17 different star systems. The ancient alien leader had not faced a real challenge to his authority in over 50 years. The idea that a single human could threaten everything he had built was more than an insult. It was a cancer that needed to be cut out before it could spread further. Orders went out across the Syndicate fleet. Find the human Marine and bring him back alive for public execution. The Supreme Commander would personally oversee his death and broadcast it across the galaxy. The rebellion would be crushed before it could truly begin, and order would be restored to his empire. Supreme Commander Minho emerged from his meditation chamber for the first time in 50 years. His crystalline skin crackled with bioelectric energy that made the air itself hum with power. The ancient being was so old that most aliens considered him a living myth. His empire had been built on the simple principle that fear was the ultimate weapon that could break any species. The commander's private fortress hung in the center of the Omega Nebula, surrounded by the twisted remains of dead stars. From this hidden location he had directed the conquest of 17 star systems without ever needing to leave his sanctuary. His reputation alone had been enough to make entire civilizations surrender without firing a shot. But now that carefully constructed image of invincibility was cracking. The footage of a single human defeating his most trusted warlords had spread to every corner of known space. Worse yet, human slaves throughout his territory were beginning to show signs of rebellion. Small acts of defiance were growing into organized resistance movements. Minho studied the security recordings from the Death's Edge with growing fury. He watched the human move through his supposedly impenetrable defenses like a force of nature. The being called Sergeant Kim showed no fear, no hesitation, and no mercy as he systematically destroyed everything the Syndicate had thrown at him. The Supreme Commander had encountered humans before, during the early raids on their colonies. They had seemed like any other primitive species. Their technology was crude, their weapons were simple, and they died easily when faced with superior firepower. Nothing he had seen suggested they were capable of producing warriors like this Marine. Emergency meetings were called across all 17 star systems as Syndicate leaders tried to understand what had gone wrong. Admiral Changmin paced nervously in his fleet command center as reports flooded in from across their territory. The Third Fleet was stretched thin, trying to maintain order as human insurgency spread like a plague. On the industrial world of Proxima 7, human factory workers had staged a complete work stoppage that shut down 3 major manufacturing plants. The alien overseers had responded with their usual brutality, executing dozens of workers to terrorize the others back to their duties. But instead of breaking human spirits, the violence only made them more determined to resist. Colonel Yunji had overseen human slaves for 8 years without major problems. Her factories produced weapons and ship components for the Syndicate fleet. The workers had always been docile and obedient, doing their jobs without complaint until they collapsed from exhaustion or malnutrition. Now she found herself facing organized sabotage and coordinated work slowdowns. Equipment broke down at critical moments. Production schedules were delayed by mysterious accidents. Worst of all, the humans had started singing while they worked. The songs were in their own language, but the defiant tone needed no translation. Situation was deteriorating rapidly across all Syndicate holdings. On the mining asteroid TX-4119, human workers had caused an explosion that destroyed 3 months' worth of rare mineral extraction. The blast had been timed perfectly to cause maximum damage while minimizing human casualties. It showed planning and coordination that should have been impossible for enslaved populations. Meanwhile, Sergeant Kim had vanished completely into the underground tunnel system beneath Nexus Prime's surface. The planet had been strip-mined for centuries, leaving behind a maze of abandoned passages that stretched for thousands of miles in every direction. The network was so complex that even the Syndicate's own maps were incomplete. Hunting parties, equipped with the most advanced sensors in the galaxy, searched the tunnels for any trace of the human Marine. Elite tracking units that had never failed to find their prey followed false trails that led to dead ends or worse. Several teams had been found days later torn apart by improvised explosives and booby traps. What the aliens did not realize was that Kim was not simply hiding from them. His years of military training had taught him to adapt to any environment, and the tunnel system reminded him of the underground complexes where he had learned urban warfare tactics. More importantly, he was making contact with other humans, the ID. Tunnels were not empty as the Syndicate believed. Hidden in the deepest levels were communities of escaped slaves and prisoners who had been written off as dead. These survivors had learned to live in the darkness using skills passed down from mining engineers and maintenance workers who had built the original tunnel networks. Dr. Hae-Jin Lee had been the leader of the underground community for 3 years. The former terraforming engineer had organized scattered groups of refugees into a network that could share resources and information while maintaining security from alien search parties. When Kim stumbled into their hidden settlement, she saw an opportunity she had been waiting for since her capture. Kim's military knowledge proved invaluable in transforming the frightened survivors into something resembling a proper resistance movement. He taught them combat tactics, showed them how to move silently through enemy territory, and most importantly helped them believe that they could actually fight back against their oppressors. The human underground began launching coordinated attacks against Syndicate installations on the surface. Supply convoys disappeared in the tunnel entrances. Communication stations went offline without warning. Guard posts were found empty with no trace of what had happened to their alien occupants. Each successful operation inspired more humans to join the resistance. Word spread through hidden communication networks that had been established by escaped prisoners over the years. The message was simple, but powerful. The aliens could be beaten. The Marine had shown them how to fight, and now they were learning to strike back. Supreme Commander Minho's rage was legendary among his subordinates, but his response to the growing rebellion was calculated and brutal. He personally took command of the hunt for Sergeant Kim, bringing in specialized units from across his empire. The rewards offered for the humans' capture would make the successful hunters wealthy beyond imagination. But the human resistance was growing stronger with each passing day. News of their victories reached other worlds throughout Syndicate territory, inspiring uprisings that stretched alien forces even thinner. The empire that had been built on fear was discovering that ruling through terror only worked when the victims believed they were powerless. On distant Earth, Admiral Chen's rescue fleet was making maximum speed toward Syndicate space. The ships carried the finest warriors humanity had ever produced, and they were armed with weapons specifically designed to fight against technologically superior enemies. The Marines had a saying that dated back centuries: "No one gets left behind." The final confrontation was approaching, and both sides knew it. The Syndicate would either crush the human rebellion before reinforcements arrived, or face a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Supreme Commander Minho made his decision with the cold calculation that had built his empire. He would gather his strongest forces at Nexus Prime and end the human threat permanently. Deep beneath Nexus Prime's scarred surface, a revolution was growing in the forgotten tunnels that honeycombed the planet like arteries in a living body. The ancient mining network stretched for thousands of miles in every direction, creating a hidden world that the Syndicate had never bothered to explore. They had written off the depths as worthless after the valuable minerals were extracted. Sergeant Dongwoo Kim had found more than just a hiding place in those dark passages. Hidden in the deepest levels was a community of survivors that the aliens had assumed were dead. These humans had built a secret society in the darkness, learning to live without sunlight or fresh air, while staying hidden from their former masters. Dr. Hee-Jin Lee met Kim at the entrance to their main settlement 3 weeks after his escape from the Death's Edge. The former terraforming engineer had organized the scattered refugees into cells that could operate independently while sharing resources and information. Each group knew only what they needed to maintain security while working toward their common goal of survival. The underground city was carved from living rock using tools salvaged from the old mining operations. Hydroponic gardens grew food in chambers lit by stolen power cells. Water came from deep wells that tapped into underground rivers. The air was recycled through systems that the aliens had abandoned when they moved their operations to the surface. Kim's arrival changed everything. For the hidden community, his military training and combat experience transformed their desperate struggle for survival into something that could actually threaten their oppressors. Within days, he was teaching volunteers how to fight, how to move silently through enemy territory, and most importantly, how to believe they could win. The first major operation targeted the processing center, where newly captured humans were sorted for slavery or execution. The facility was heavily guarded by Syndicate security forces and protected by energy barriers that could stop most weapons. But Kim and his recruits had advantages that the aliens could not counter. They knew the tunnel systems better than anyone alive. They could move through spaces too small for most alien species. They had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Most importantly, they were fighting for their families, their friends, and their freedom. The aliens were just following orders from masters who saw them as expendable. Kim led 12 volunteers through the maintenance tunnels while Dr. Lee's team created a distraction at the main entrance. The attack came at dawn when the facility's third shift was at its most vulnerable. Human prisoners were being loaded onto transport ships that would scatter them across the galaxy. The assault was swift and brutal. Kim's team emerged from ventilation, shafts, and maintenance hatches throughout the complex. They moved with precision learned from years of military training, using improvised weapons made from mining tools and salvaged equipment. Explosive charges made from industrial chemicals brought down key support structures. The aliens tried to respond but found themselves fighting ghosts. The humans struck hard and fast, then vanished back into the tunnels before reinforcements could arrive. By the time Syndicate forces regained control of the facility, nearly 200 human prisoners had disappeared into the underground network. The success of the operation sent shockwaves through the Syndicate's command structure. Reports reached Supreme Commander Minho within hours, accompanied by security footage that showed the impossible. Humans were not just escaping anymore. They were fighting back with coordination and skill that suggested military training. Admiral Changmin's Third Fleet was already stretched thin, trying to maintain order across multiple star systems. The new reports of organized human resistance made his situation even more desperate. He had ships and troops, but they were designed to fight conventional battles against enemy fleets, not guerrilla warfare against invisible opponents. The underground war expanded rapidly as more humans joined the resistance movement. Supply convoys, traveling between Syndicate facilities, began disappearing without trace. Communication towers went offline during critical operations. Guard posts were found empty with no sign of what happened to their occupants except scattered alien blood. Each victory inspired more acts of rebellion throughout Syndicate territory. On the agricultural world of Kepler 186F, human slaves seized control of food production facilities and held them for 6 days. They destroyed enough crops to cause shortages on 3 different star systems before being overwhelmed by alien reinforcements. The mining asteroid TX-419 became a symbol of human defiance when workers caused an explosion that destroyed the entire facility. The blast was timed perfectly to maximize damage while allowing most humans to escape in stolen shuttles. The loss of rare minerals set back Syndicate weapons production by months. Factory supervisor Colonel Yunji watched her industrial complex slowly fall apart as human workers turned every tool and machine into a weapon against their oppressors. Production lines that had run smoothly for years began producing defective parts that would cause alien equipment to fail at critical moments. The situation became even more complex when long-range sensors detected the approaching human fleet from Earth. Admiral Chen's ships were still weeks away from Syndicate territory, but their approach sent panic through alien command centers. The aliens had studied human military technology and found it primitive compared to their own forces. But the psychological impact was devastating to Syndicate morale. If humans could fight back this effectively with improvised weapons and desperate courage, what would happen when their actual military forces arrived with proper equipment and training? The empire that had ruled through fear was learning that terror worked both ways. Kim used the time to expand his network throughout the tunnel system. Small teams of resistance fighters established bases at key locations where they could strike at surface targets, then disappear back into the depths. They learned to live like their ancestors had during Earth's ancient wars, moving silently through hostile territory and trusting each other completely. Dr. Lee coordinated intelligence gathering from her hidden command center deep beneath the planet's surface. Escaped slaves and prisoners brought information about Syndicate troop movements and weak points in their defenses. The aliens were discovering that ruling an enslaved population required constant vigilance that drained resources from other operations. The resistance developed its own communication network using frequencies that the aliens could not detect or block. Messages passed through the tunnels faster than Syndicate couriers could travel on the surface. Human communities on other worlds began receiving detailed instructions for sabotage operations and guerrilla tactics. Supreme Commander Minho's fury reached legendary proportions as reports of human insurgency flooded in from every corner of his empire. The ancient being had built his power on the principle that inferior species would always submit to superior force. The idea that humans could organize effective resistance challenged everything he believed about the natural order of the galaxy. His response was characteristically brutal and direct. He would gather the full might of his empire at Nexus Prime and crush the human rebellion permanently. The public execution of Sergeant Kim would restore fear to his subjects while demonstrating the price of defiance. The galaxy would remember why the Syndicate was the supreme power among the stars. But in the tunnels beneath the planet's surface, Kim and his growing army of volunteers were preparing for the final battle. They had learned to fight as their species, had always fought when faced with extinction. They would make the aliens pay for every human life in blood and fire until either freedom was won or there were no humans left to fight. The final confrontation began when Supreme Commander Minho's personal dreadnought emerged from hyperspace above Nexus Prime like a metal moon blotting out the stars. The Void Hammer was 5 miles long from bow to stern and bristled with weapons that could sterilize entire continents. Behind it came over 200 warships carrying the full might of the Syndicate fleet. Minho had brought everything he possessed to crush what he still believed was a minor rebellion by an inferior species. His crystalline skin glowed with bioelectric energy as he stood on the command bridge surveying the scarred planet below. Somewhere in those tunnels was the human who had dared to challenge his empire. Soon that defiance would be punished in ways that would echo across the galaxy for generations. But the human resistance had not been idle during the weeks of preparation. Kim and Dr. Lee had transformed their underground network into a sophisticated military operation, complete with supply lines, communication systems, and strike teams trained in everything from sabotage to assassination. More importantly, they had been in constant contact with Admiral Chen's approaching fleet. The Syndicate's assault began with orbital bombardment, designed to collapse the tunnel systems and force the humans into the open, where they could be hunted down systematically. Massive energy beams carved through the planet's surface like surgical knives, turning ancient mining sites into seas of molten rock. The aliens expected to see panicked humans fleeing from their hiding places. Instead, they found empty tunnels and abandoned positions. The humans had moved their essential operations to the deepest levels where even the most powerful weapons could not reach them. Kim had learned from his military training that the best defense was to make the enemy come to you on ground of your choosing. The real surprise came when the bombardment stopped. As alien landing craft descended toward the planet's surface, they were met by coordinated attacks from hidden positions throughout the tunnel network. Human fighters emerged from concealed entrances like deadly ghosts, striking at the invaders with weapons and tactics the aliens had never encountered. Kim's response to the invasion was swift and devastating. Using intelligence gathered from captured alien equipment, his teams launched synchronized attacks on Syndicate ground installations. Communication arrays exploded in brilliant flashes. Supply depots burned with fires that could be seen from orbit. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy they could not see against opponents who knew every tunnel and hiding place. The tide of battle shifted dramatically when long-range sensors detected Admiral Chen's fleet finally arriving in the Nexus Prime system. 30 human warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the star system, moving at maximum speed toward the alien fleet. The vessels were smaller than their Syndicate counterparts, but they had been designed specifically for this type of warfare. The human ships were built for speed and maneuverability rather than raw firepower. Their crews had trained for years studying alien technology and tactics while preparing for the day when humanity would have to fight for its place among the stars. More importantly, every warrior on those ships carried the same determination that had driven their species to survive on a world where everything seemed designed to kill them. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance, watching the massive alien fleet spread across her tactical displays. Her own ships looked tiny compared to the Syndicate dreadnoughts, but she had advantages that the aliens could not understand. Human crews could think faster, adapt quicker, and fight longer than most species in the galaxy. The space battle that followed would be remembered as one of the most decisive engagements in galactic history. Human fighters swarmed through the Syndicate formation like angry wasps, using tactics developed during Earth's own wars to devastating effect. They struck at weak points in alien ship designs, exploiting flaws that the Syndicate had never bothered to fix. The aliens had always relied on intimidation and brute force to win their battles. Their massive ships were designed to terrify enemies into surrender, rather than fight prolonged engagements. When faced with opponents who refused to be intimidated and whose technology, while different, was far from primitive, the Syndicate's advantages began to crumble. Kim watched the space battle from his command post deep in the tunnel system. Explosions lit up the sky above Nexus Prime as human and alien ships traded fire at impossible speeds. Each flash of light meant that someone was dying in the cold vacuum of space, but he felt no pity for the alien crews who had enslaved and murdered his people. The underground war continued even as the fleet battle raged overhead. Syndicate ground forces found themselves trapped between the human resistance below and the threat of orbital bombardment from their own ships above. They could not use their heavy weapons without risking damage to their own vessels in the low orbit required for planetary assault. Dr. Lee coordinated rescue operations for human prisoners being held in surface facilities, while Kim led strike teams against alien command posts. The resistance fighters moved through the tunnels like blood through veins, striking wherever the enemy was weakest, then vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Supreme Commander Minho watched in growing disbelief as his supposedly invincible fleet was systematically dismantled by vessels he had dismissed as inferior. Human destroyers danced around his massive guns like leaves in a hurricane, using their speed and size to avoid the worst of his firepower, while targeting critical systems with surgical precision. When the Voidhammer's shields finally collapsed, under concentrated human fire, the Supreme Commander faced a choice that no Syndicate leader had ever been forced to make. He could fight to the death and take thousands of beings with him, or he could surrender and face whatever justice the humans deemed appropriate. The final scene played out not in the depths of space, but in the tunnels beneath Nexus Prime where Sergeant Kim stood face to face with the being who had terrorized 17 star systems. Minho's crystalline skin had lost its glow, and his bioelectric aura flickered weakly as he knelt in the rubble of his shattered empire. Around them, human Marines who had fought their way down from the surface stood alongside rescued prisoners and resistance fighters. All eyes were on the Marine who had started this impossible war with nothing but determination and a combat knife. Many expected him to execute the fallen tyrant as payment for the millions of humans who had died under Syndicate rule. But Kim's response surprised everyone present, including himself. Instead of killing the creature who had caused so much suffering, he looked down at Minho and spoke words that would echo through galactic history. The United States Marine Corps does not murder prisoners, even alien ones. You will face trial for your crimes, and justice will be decided by those you wronged. It was a moment that defined not just the end of the Syndicate's reign of terror, but the beginning of humanity's reputation as a species that combined devastating military capability with an unshakable moral code. The galaxy would learn that humans could be the most dangerous enemies or the most trustworthy allies depending on how they were treated. Word of the human victories spread faster than their ships could travel, inspiring oppressed populations throughout the known worlds and serving notice to would-be conquerors that humanity was no longer prey to be hunted. The age of human expansion among the stars had begun, built on principles of justice and protection rather than conquest and domination, and at its foundation was the example set by one Marine who had walked alone into the heart of darkness and emerged victorious not through superior firepower or alien technology, but through the simple human refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy would remember the day when Sergeant Dongwoo Kim proved that sometimes one person with enough courage could change the fate of entire civilizations.